So, in this video, I'm going to show you how I made this cover for Fool. So back when I made this cover a couple years ago, I really didn't use 3D a lot, and I didn't really know it that well. I knew a little bit of Daz, I knew a little bit of Blender, but most of my album covers at the time were done with Photoshop. So when I got asked by Fool to make his cover for Time Spender, the brief was really straightforward. It was kind of like a literal take on the words. And sometimes those are like the easiest and the most fun jobs because you get a lot of creative freedom to kind of try different things. So in this case, he wanted it to have something to do with a clock and then something with his character with like the mask, the iconic mask. So I'm going to show you a couple sketches here that I did that I then sent to him, get his ideas on it. What was he feeling? What was he not feeling? Anyway, so these were the kind of sketches that I sent him, and he really liked this one. I liked it too because it is similar to another cover I had done for him for the Night EP, I think. So I used 3 major programs on this cover, which was Daz 3D, Blender, and Photoshop. So first let's jump into Daz, where I'll show you the figure that I set up, and then we'll kind of go chronologically from there. In Daz, this is the figure that I had set up. I think this outfit was something that I purchased a while ago, and I've definitely used this model and this outfit on many covers, just because like the whole leather jacket thing is so iconic, and it's just a very basic outfit that I think I was just able to work on top of and change colors and things like that. And it gave me a good enough amount of like reflections and all this kind of specularity stuff that I can use if I want it to be like wet outside, or if I want it to be dry, I can kind of like soften those up a little bit. So this was the pose that I made based on the sketch. And in the sketch, the character is like holding a like a stopwatch or just like a pocket watch or a stopwatch. And from here, I took this character and exported it as an OBJ and brought that into Blender. So then in Blender, here's what we have. Now I'm a lot more familiar with Blender and I know how to use it a lot better and faster. But at the time when I was still learning it and I was still kind of figuring my way out around it, I just brought the model in as is and set up a very basic camera angle. So if we go into the camera, here's the angle. Just again, following the rules of the sketch. When I made the first series of sketches, the one that he liked, I went and I used this as the base to do like a sketch version 2, and then sent that to him to make sure like the color and like the mood and everything like that was to his liking. And actually, what was helpful was that he was able to send me a picture of himself wearing the mask in that same pose, like he was holding like toothbrushes or toothpaste or something like that. But I love that because he really wanted his mask in there, and I think nowadays I could probably remodel and make his mask in 3D, so then I just have that as a 3D asset, kind of like how I modeled Fowler's car and used that in a ton of the covers that I did with him. But at the time, I really didn't know enough to do that, so I just brought in this shape is an icosphere. So I brought in like this icosphere, and I just kind of like shaped it to a face size because it had like enough angles and kind of corners that simulated some of the angles and corners in his mask. So then I was able to at least use this for lighting information. And let me show you how I set up the lighting here. So if we go into rendered view, this is essentially what I got out of Blender. In Blender, I was able to apply a few materials to like jacket to give it like a bit of red color. The skin was just like a basic skin color. And then the mask, this was like a mask light reference and color reference because there's like this soft blue light coming from underneath and then a really strong rim light coming from the top. And I knew that setting this up in 3D was going to give me a lot of really useful information. I also, he needed to have a hoodie on, but I didn't have a hoodie in the character for Daz, so I put on a beanie. And it's like, somewhat close, at least to like the lighting information, the fold information. And again, like this reflected light on the cheekbone, on the jaw, or how the red light pops up over here. I wouldn't have thought of that if I was just drawing this from scratch from my head without any kind of reference. Again, like I would probably 3D model the mask. I would probably do most of this artwork in 3D at this point and get a lot of that color information. And like I ended up adding a glow to this pocket watch in Photoshop and having to kind of fake that glow. But here I could probably make one in 3D pretty fast with like emissive materials or lights, and then get actual lighting information, which would be more helpful. So sometimes I think about going back on old covers and remaking them now and seeing like how I would do them differently or how much better they would look if I use the skills that I know now. And maybe I'll do that for another video. But for now, this is what we had. From here, I went directly into Photoshop, and I'll show you what that looks like. So then the final stage is we're in Photoshop. I'm going to turn off all these layers, and we can kind of start from the beginning. All right, so this is the render straight out of Blender, and you can see I've already started to kind of paint on the layer itself. I'm like a traditional kind of painter. I just paint right on the layer, or I make a new layer if I'm not sure about a brush stroke or an addition. So with this one, the background again is pretty straightforward and simple, just like these gradients and clouds, something to kind of fill the space. And then I brought in the character, and you can already tell I'm starting to paint over it. I'm starting to kind of emphasize the highlights and starting to emphasize the folds and the shadows, and just paint in some artistic expression with brushes, and not even textured brushes, just round brushes. Like if I zoom in, you can see that a lot of it's very loose and kind of like scribbly, and I'm just going in and adding details that the jacket didn't originally have, or I'm kind of like touching up like some of the shadows and highlights and things like that. Here I start painting in the pocket watch, and then I'll just turn on the layer slowly and go through. This was just really a block out of that original one. Once I made this version with the kind of like polygonal mask reference before Fool had sent me a reference of his actual mask in a similar angle. So once he sent me that, I was able to just drop that straight in to the file and paint over it and kind of like give it a artistic style with my overpaint in a way that matched the rest of the image. So you can see like underneath of this is a bit of the original photo, but I'm going in and I'm kind of adding some brush strokes and variation to make it match with the rest of it. And the original mask had totally different lighting on it, but the information I got from the information I had from this render helped me add new lighting and new color variation to this mask. So then kind of touching up the thing, adding the little grid. The hoodie is based on the photo that he sent, but the photo was too like dark, so I just kind of had to really reference it and go real simple with the folds, nothing too complicated. Then I added a little like chain to the stopwatch, and then I started painting in accents for this futuristic kind of pocket watch thing. So I just added like very basic like neon colors and some kind of generic sci-fi design, and on the inside I have, you know, his logo embedded kind of into it, so it feels like it's his and it's part of his character. Some blur, some glow, and then this is where I started adding my own understanding of how the rim light would work, and how the light coming off of that watch would be glowing onto this underside of the fingers and kind of illuminating his hand. And also rim light really just serves as a good way of separating something. So, you know, if you have like a very bright thing behind another bright thing, you can use rim light and then also add shadow somewhere. So adding shadows, having shadow on the fingers on the top, like you can see I add shadows on top of the fingers, and then the rim light helps like separate that a little bit more. Adding glow, adding smoke, kind of expressive smoke. With this I would just kind of you know, add like, let's say if I make a new layer, the way that I added the smoke was I would just like sample the color, like this color, make a gradient like that, and then use the eraser tool with a soft kind of, with like a round brush, and just kind of, you know, change the opacity a bit and kind of get this effect. I'm using a mouse because my tablet's put away, but this is the idea. So I just kind of, you know, be loose and just get like the atmosphere of it there, but not necessarily have it be creating any specific shape, because then you can just always take this and rotate it, and maybe it looks better this way. Now the bottom corner is covered up and the background is covered up and this shoulder is a little bit exposed, or you can turn it, or you can like stretch it. Maybe you want to have it in the background. So that's kind of the way that I did that smoke here. Then I started painting on top to bring in some of that reflected light from the stopwatch on the hoodie, and again adding additional light values and additional rim light to really separate him from the background. More interesting colors and lights, and just really making this thing feel like an artifact, and really giving it a lot of energy that's emitting from it, like light bleed and all these kinds of things. It was really fun to add those effects. And then I added these. I started to learn how to kind of fake bokeh blurs and like lens dust in the air. And the way I do this fake lens dust is I just straight up paint it. And so let me show you how I do that. I'm actually gonna grab my tablet to do this. Gotta adjust the camera. All right, so the way that I would do these particles and these fake kind of bokeh effects is I would get a round brush like this, just a little bit big, and then take a light value, like let's say we sample this light value. And opacity is 100, smoothing is 100, and I would just kind of like, you know, either draw them or stamp them with my just tap the tablet and make these like different type shapes. And then what I would do is I would go into I would either go into the smudge brush and kind of smudge them a little bit, soften them up a little bit, soften the edges to give them a bit of like autofocus effect. And the more variety in the opacity, the better, because some things are closer, some things are further, and it really it's a really fun effect to play with if you have time. And then I would grab the same round brush as an eraser at like a maybe 20% opacity. I would just kind of go back over it. And then this would also like sometimes bokeh has like it looks like a halo, and then that's just kind of like my attempt at recreating that. And I'll just go back in and erase out a little bit, sometimes more, sometimes less, whatever felt, you know, appropriate. And then, you know, you can get a larger variety. You can make it a little bit bigger, like they can overlap. That's totally fine. You can make them subtle, make them tiny, kind of like that. And then again, a little smudge brush, smudge it out. Eraser. Something like that. And then again, you know, separating the background from the character with some really bright rim light, and I smudged that as well to give it a bit of like motion and blur. After that, I added like this really expressive red glow, again just like a gradient, and then using a textured eraser to erase out different values randomly, just kind of doing it going by eye, and you know, leaving it where I think looks interesting, where I think it brings attention to. I want to give you something in the background to look at here. I want to give you something in the bottom right corner, and then in the top. So then there's kind of this triangle composition going on here. Then I added a bunch of lens dust and textures and things like that. I think this was like a lens flare, some more like light to kind of balance it out. And then that's pretty much it. You know, a little bit of chromatic aberration, a little bit of noise here, and then some final touches with like levels to really make it pop. So yeah, so this is how I made the cover for Time Spender by Fool. I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.